It was All Hallows Eve, 2020, and the common folk dressed as doctors, bandits, and welders roamed the streets like mindless zombies. I was on my way to a superhero-themed Halloween party after a full day of detective work. I leaned back in my detective chair and took a couple drags from my detective pipe as I looked forward to a fun, relaxing evening with no crimes and where the only mystery would be what new friends will I make tonight. The partygoers are having themselves a gas, pretending to be all these totally awesome superheroes. Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, you name it, they were in the building. But, what do you dress up as if, you don't mean to brag, but you kind of already are a real-life superhero? Well, I eventually decided to just stay in my work clothes and write Super Detective Man on my chest to play along. You can make the case that this party was off to a smashing start. DJ Dr. Strange was turning the dance floor into a bona fide insane asylum with his otherworldly bangers. Black Panther was doing shots of some mysterious glowing substance off of the ice luge, and Texas Twister was, well, playing Twister with Catwoman and Daredevil. As for me, I was so glad that I could finally let my hair down from all the mystery solving that I headed straight for the dance floor. Now, if you know anything about me, you know that I love doing my spinny dance. The concept of the spinny dance is quite simple. You just keep spinning around and around in a circle. But the experience itself is a kind of ecstasy that is virtually impossible to convey in words. As I'm doing my spinny dance, I'm feeling all of the stresses and bullshit of detective life dripping off of me like melted butter. That is, until, out of the corner of my eye, I spot two guys walking in the back door who were smelling a whole lot like pork, if y'all catching my drift. These fellas came in hot, with their heads down, and they were the only ones dressed as doctors at a superhero party. I continue to track them as I'm spinning around and around, and just can't shake that feeling that we might really have a situation. And just like that, I am faced with a critical life decision. Do I stop doing my favorite and much needed spinny dance to go investigate? Or do I pretend that I did not just see what I just so clearly saw and have to stomach the guilt should the worst case scenario come to pass? Well, much to my chagrin, I eventually decided that when duty calls, and ceased my spinning so I could begin the investigation. I knew the first move was to go to Dr. Octopus, because he had the list of everyone who was supposed to be at the party. I discreetly pointed the guys out to Doc Ock, and he agreed they looked very, very suspicious. And he went to ask them if they were on the list. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? They were not on the list, but said they were invited by someone by the name of Alyssa Chanel. Alyssa Chanel. Alyssa Chanel? I kept turning the name over and over again in my mind, sensing into who this character could be. Is she the kind of person who would call the cops on a COVID party? Is she even a real person? Maybe these cops gave a fake name. A classic redirection technique that I learned while in detective school. Regardless, I knew what had to be done, and I was fully prepared to do it. I had to go one by one and ask every party goer at this party if they knew an Alyssa Chanel. But this was not my first rodeo, and I knew I would need a little something to get these assholes singing like canaries. So I lined my pockets with hard candies fuller than a piñata so I could make them an offer they could not refuse. I wrote Alyssa Chanel in all capital letters across a sheet of paper and started interrogating the partygoers as to their knowledge of this suspect. The first few interrogations left me high and dry. Either these superheroes were playing super dumb, or I needed to stay patient and keep my cool. They say if you dig in place long enough, you'll eventually strike oil, and well, they might be right, because soon enough, the truth sprung a leak. I questioned a lady dressed up as Wonder Woman who said she thought she maybe knew an Alyssa, but didn't know her last name, and maybe it's the same person? I said it sounds like we might have a match, and asked her to detail everything she knew about this character. Wonder Woman started spilling the beans, said she was short, about 5'11", and could often be seen wearing a fedora with a feather in it. She also drank tall boys. I was scribbling down all this info furiously into my detective casebook. I showed Wonder Woman that I had a second piece of hard candy if it might help jog her memory a little bit, but she claimed that was all she knew. Fair enough. I was just happy to finally be making some progress on the case. Little did I know that I was about to hit the mother lode. I interrogated a Mr. Aquaman and discovered that he not only knew Alyssa Chanel, but was the one who invited her to the party. Boom. Bullseye. Now, not only did I have confirmation of identity, I also had a paper trail as long as the Great Wall of China that I could present to the courts. I cut right straight directly to the chase and asked Aquaman if Alyssa Chanel was the kind of person who might call the cops on a COVID party. He responded with, "I don't personally feel that she would do something like that, but she might have ratted us out to the cops." My jaw dropped straight into next Tuesday. I got a little excited at this new intel and grabbed Aquaman by the collar, got mere inches away from his face, and shouted, "Where is she?" To which Aquaman nervously replied, "Dude, I haven't seen her tonight. Chill out." A likely story, I thought to myself. Almost too likely. I decided to just let this one go and continue to pursue other leads. Little did I know that the plot was about to thicken like a chicken pot pie. I was trying to get Wolverine to start talking and nearly lost my cool again when Aquaman runs up to me and says, "She's here, she's here." Holy shit, she's here, I thought to myself, taking a moment to adjust to the shock. This is the moment I had been waiting for all night. It was showtime. I approached her with the confidence of 10,000 suns. We started off with the usual pleasantries. I said hi, she said hi, how are you? I said how I'm doing is none of my fucking business, thank you very much, and went straight for the $1 million question that most detectives would be too chicken shit to ask. "Are you the kind of person that might call the cops on a COVID party?" I blurted out. "Dude, are you kidding me? I would cheer them on," she exclaimed. "The partiers are the cops?" I further inquired. "The partiers, of course," she replied. She continued to defend herself, saying things like, "I would never ever rat out a COVID party," and tried to make the case that the reason she would never rat out a COVID party is so that she could attend the COVID party. All of this was making sense. A little too much sense, if you know what I mean. Why was she being so defensive about it not being her? And why was she so eager to answer all my questions and keep talking about this? One super interesting piece of intel I was able to milk out of her was that apparently in high school her quote-unquote joke nickname was Chanel Fox, who was, wait for it, an undercover detective. Well. I guess some little foxes just never stop running, do they? I had had enough and saw myself outside to clear my head with a couple more drags from my detective pipe. Something was just not adding up. It was like the truth was staring me right in the face, but I just could not see it. I returned to the party, and it was around this time I met up with one of my colleagues who was dressed up as Super Detective Woman. Now, granted, I don't always see eye to eye with my colleague, but I respect her as a detective, so I figured I would just run the case by her. After much deliberation, my colleague was able to convince me of why we had sufficient evidence to safely assume that Alyssa Chanel did not call the cops on the party, and that I could finally close this case. My colleague also had me promise her that I would consult her first if I was ever thinking about reopening this case. I promised, but I was also smart enough to cross my fingers behind my back just in case. As soon as I closed the case, I felt my mental health come back to some sense of equilibrium. This had been the longest day of detective work that I had ever experienced, and needless to say, I was very excited to get home and finally get some rest. I should also mention it was around this time that I received intel that our two suspects had left the party hours ago, citing their reason as quote-unquote, the vibes are off. Pot, kettle, black, someone needs to take a cold hard look in the mirror. Before I could head home, I needed to go drop some turtles off at the pond. Turns out these superheroes didn't have the superpower to hold their bladders because there was a line about 20 deep to use the only bathroom in this dump. Looking back, I honestly probably should have just tried to hold it and left the party at this point because waiting in line got my mind spinning faster than a top. All the pieces of this impossible puzzle swirled around my head in little sound bites. Chanel Fox, undercover detective. She might have routed us out to the cops. I would cheer them on. Tall boys. I couldn't stop thinking about how defensive she was that it wasn't her, and how overly eager she was to participate in the investigation. These are just not things that innocent people do. It finally became my turn to use the bathroom, so I locked the door, dropped trow, and saddled up. I thought about how sometimes in life we all wish it could be as simple as an open-shut case. Black and white, cut and dry, this or that. But how sometimes it's actually a lot more like shades of gray. You know how Spider-Man has his famous Spidey sense? Well, I, Super Detective Man, have what I call my bullshit barometer. And oh boy, was it back with a vengeance. I knew that I had to reopen this case, and my intuition was telling me that my colleague would not be on board with this, and that I would have to go rogue and call the shots on my own. I decided to trust my intuition and reopen the case right then and there. I strew my detective materials out across the bathroom floor and began making all sorts of connections that I hadn't seen previously. How could I have missed this before? How could I have been so ignorant? It was all becoming so clear now. At this point, people started knocking at the bathroom door. Just one more minute, I said as I hurried to get a couple more of the pieces to fall into place. One thing you definitely don't want is a large angry mob of fake superheroes on your case, so I knew I'd have to come up with something good for my exit. I opened the door to face the group of disgruntled superheroes and quickly stated my catchphrase. A detective's work is never done. Looking at the group, I was stunned to see who but none other than my colleague was in line, who was absolutely devastated to see that I had broken my promise and reopened the case without consulting her first, even though I knew in my heart of hearts that I did not break the promise because my fingers had been crossed. I was so done with all the drama at this point that I just ran and grabbed my belongings so I could finally head home where I could continue work on the case in peace.